Okay, we're recording. Usually they have an annoying voice that tells you it's recording. All right, so I presume all of you are flow curious. Brian Keith Noonan, and I'm here today with a very special guest whose identity I shall reveal in a little while. But what is this flow thing, you may ask? It is a state of consciousness, and I would go as far to say is it's a state of mind and body where we're feeling our best and performing our best at whatever we're doing. I first experienced flow as a musician, then flow as a U.S. Marine, then motorcycle riding and skiing, all before I really knew what it was. And all that changed after reading and rereading Steven Kotler's books like The Rise of Superman and Stealing Fire, and now The Art of Impossible that just came out. And eventually finding my way to the Flow Research Collective and their Zero to Dangerous program. So as nice as it is to experience flow as a musician or an athlete, experiencing it on a regular basis with your most important work is a total game changer. So this is not just for fun, this is for work, this is for business, this is for all of life. I think this program is actually a great handbook for life, for living a high flow lifestyle. So if you didn't hear before, please type what you do and any questions for us in the chat, and we'll get to each one of them. And now for my surprise for you, I am thrilled and honored today to have one of the foremost authorities in the world on flow science and peak performance, the co-founder with Steven Kotler of the Flow Research Collective and the Chief Operating Officer, Rian Doris. Rian, please say hi for us.
Hey folks, thank you for having me. I appreciate it, Brian. Fun to be here.
Well, we're totally psyched. So not only will you have what you thought you'd get today, which is myself with a few months of deep diving into this, but you have a true Jedi of flow science and peak performance. So I'm looking forward to getting to your questions, and just keep them coming, and we'll just go depending on how many people are here and how many questions there are, probably go for about 30 minutes, and we'll go. Anything you want to say before we start addressing questions, Rian?
Well, I would be curious potentially to actually ask everyone a question, which potentially will prompt our questions if you're open to it. I'm Perfect. Just curious what is most difficult day to day, hour to hour, about trying to get into flow, trying to get into the zone whilst working. What are the biggest challenges people have, and we can start speaking to those potentially.
Perfect. So feel free to jot those down in the chat, and I'm going to start from the top. Jeff didn't have any questions yet. Maddie's an MRI technologist and a mom, right on. Oh, the video's not working. Let me check you, Maddie. Let me make sure you can. It doesn't look like you're restricted from video at all, so I apologize for that. It might be something on if you click the camera icon, the lower left, you should be able to assign a camera to the Zoom. All right. Okay, Jeff gave her instructions. All right, my bad. Okay, Dalton runs a few businesses, both online and brick and mortar, right on. Jeff, my experience with flow is from reading Grit, which reference Mihai Csikszentmihalyi's work on flow. He's considered the godfather of flow science, although research was done far before him on this topic. Curious how you all feel flow as you describe it, compared with deliberate practice. Got something on that, Rian?
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, they're not necessarily comparable in that they're not of the same category, flow and deliberate practice. Deliberate practice is a way of training or trying to improve at anything.
Would that be what Steven calls accurate work?
In some respects, I mean, deliberate practice is a way of improving at a specific thing intentionally by deconstructing it usually and explicitly training different aspects of a thing. So, for example, deliberate practice as, let's say, a hockey player, or let's use the example of a surfer trying to do deliberate practice. They may go out one day and try and, practice the pop-up over and over and over and over again, very intentionally to expand their skill set within that specific aspect of surfing. Another day, they might go out and, attempt to get really, really good at carving, for example. And so deliberate practice involves kind of deconstructing a skill and very intentionally training up different aspects of it repeatedly with a big focus on improvement and measuring improvement. Whereas flow is just a state. So you could be in a flow state while doing deliberate practice, or you may not be in a flow state while doing deliberate practice, but still all the same be improving at whatever it is that you're doing. But when you bring flow and deliberate practice together, it can be a really, really good combination. And then the idea of accurate work is really just ensuring that the work that you're focusing on or the task that you're doing is as high leverage as possible relative to your goal. So
yeah, before discovering Flow Research Collective, I was a big fan of The One Thing by Gary Keller, and I noticed that you have that comes into sort of the goal setting and doing the one thing that makes everything else easier or unnecessary. So I thought that was cool. And folks, as you listen here, I think flow is one of the most ancient new things there is. It's had a lot more research recently and it has a lot more buzz, but all we're trying to do is work with our biology versus work against our biology. And there are very specific ways to do that. We're not going to have time to get into those ways really today, but they all live in Zero to Dangerous at the Flow Research Collective, and I'm always here to answer questions for you. So, from Dalton, oh, wait a second. Let me just fill in from Jeff first in the order it was received. Oh, wait, we did that part. Oh, yeah, okay. All right, that one we did. Stuff outside of my, okay. So he's asking how can he get into flow from it in things other than his computer programming, I'm assuming.
Basically, I've not achieved like any kind of like expertise basically in some of these areas, right? So with entrepreneurial stuff, you're always wearing different hats. So for example, like I need to start working on marketing and writing and social media posting, and all this stuff is a total freaking drag for me. Is this something that, does flow apply in these cases, or is it more about the things that I'm already good at?
Yeah, it's a good question. So there's a number of different aspects to that. One thing that's worth mentioning is that strengths are a trigger for flow in the first place. And so often when we're good at something, we get into flow doing that thing. So we spend a long time doing that thing. We get better at that thing, which makes us do it more, get into flow more, and get even better at it. So it becomes this kind of like perpetuating loop where we get better and better and into flow more and more, and then we do it more and more, which gets us better and better, and around it goes. And so identifying strengths and attempting to orient around those as much as possible with respect to the tasks that you are doing day to day is huge when it comes to flow. But you can still get into flow doing other activities, doing other things that you don't necessarily like, and definitely doing things that you're not necessarily good at. An activity is possible to get into flow within when there's some kind of outcome that you're focusing on, or some sort of, element to the activity. Again, the outcome may not be that you're, making money or producing some end result. It may be that you're aiming at something within the activity, like surfing down the side of a wave, to use the surfing example. So there has to be some kind of engagement with something within the activity, but you can get into flow doing a broad number of things, even if you don't necessarily like them. And so, so it's good to be aware of that, but you are more likely to get into flow when optimizing around your strengths as well, for sure. So maybe there's more specific bits there that you want to mention around some of the sticking points with these activities. What is it about them that feels like a drag?
Sounds like more of a learning curve kind of thing, maybe. But you might also speak to the spectrum of flow, because not all flow is macro flow. It can be micro flow, so it's a lesser degree, greater or lesser degree.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's a good thing that's worth mentioning there, is that flow exists on a spectrum from micro flow, where you get into a really interesting conversation with someone and you're having coffee and you realize it's been 30 minutes when it only felt like 10 minutes, just a mild but positive experience of flow. And that ranges then all the way down to the other side of the spectrum, which is macro flow, which is, almost a bliss-like peak experience. And again, to stay on the surfing topic, surfers often talk about being in the barrel of a wave and time slowing down and their sense of self dissolving and becoming one with the water. And it can be a very intense, significant, mystical experience. Similar example of macro flow would be skydiving or wingsuiting. You hear about, those sorts of folks talking about how it is when they feel most alive, and that those experiences alone are worth living for. And so with some of those more simple activities that maybe you don't particularly enjoy or like, you can still get into microflow. You get into microflow doing email, where your prefrontal cortex starts going slightly offline and your sense of self, that kind of internal voice or dialogue, quietens down, and you start to merge with the task you're doing. And so I'm sure, everyone can recognize that that's fairly subtle state, even when doing tasks that aren't particularly compelling. You can still get into that zone.
Yeah, mastery is definitely one of the key elements of flow. So the better you are at something, I think the more likely you are to get into a flow state. But as Rian said, there are lesser degrees, which is still better than no flow, right? Dalton is saying his biggest issue would be finding flow when your day-to-day is composed of kind of boring mundane tasks. This is similar, I think. Have you found any way to access flow while doing something like bookkeeping? Sort of along the same lines of Jeff's question.
Yeah, so
there's an Office Space quote reference here, I think, somewhere.
Yeah, love that movie, by the way. It's great.
Yes.
Yeah, it is the best. Yes, there's a number of different things to mention here. One is that flow follows focus. The way that you can think about it is that attention is filtering out from all the different information you're absorbing, because at any given time we're absorbing lots of different information, and attention is sort of like a spotlight that points out at one thing and focuses in on it. When you do that for an extended period of time, we call it focusing. And when you focus for an extended period of time, the ability to get into flow, which results in a physiological shift, emerges. And so when people are doing tasks they don't like, they often distract themselves. They often jump between those tasks and other more interesting, more stimulating tasks. They procrastinate those tasks or don't do them at all. They do them at an extremely slow pace and ultimately in a very dispersed, diffused, not focused way. And so attempting to actually really focus on those dull, boring tasks will enable flow to emerge, or at least increase the likelihood of that happening. Another thing that's worth mentioning is the challenge skills balance. So the challenge skills balance, the challenge skills equation is one of the biggest triggers for flow or drivers of flow. And this essentially is the idea that flow exists right at the sweet spot between boredom and anxiety. So if you're doing a task that is too difficult, too far beyond your existing skill level, you'll end up overstimulated and anxious and overwhelmed. And I'm sure, all of us have experienced those sorts of states. If you're doing a task like bookkeeping, let's say, and it's incredibly mundane and dull, that task can be below your existing skill level and then drop you down to a state of understimulation and boredom. And so what you want to aim for is to have the task or the activity you're doing just be a little bit harder or beyond your current skill set. So you've got to stretch yourself a bit, not to the point of snapping, but definitely not to the point or the lack of stretch to the point of boredom. So doing a task like bookkeeping, you can try and artificially increase the challenge level on that task by, say, limiting the amount of time that you're going to allow yourself to do it within would be one, simple example, and creating an artificial sense of urgency. And you pair that with much more significant focus, which is more difficult. It's more difficult to focus when we don't have interest in the task. One of the things we always say is that passion gives focus for free. And so getting into flow, doing tasks or things that you're passionate about is just much easier for that reason. But it is still possible, to get in flow while doing kind of these mundane tasks. So I would suggest you guys trying to create an artificial sense of urgency and really increase the stakes on that task and make it, make the requirements be that you have to complete it rapidly. And I think it'll make a significant difference.
That's a great hack, actually. And just so you know, and I believe I mentioned this in the post in the mastermind group, there aren't really any shortcuts to this. There aren't hacks that, even though I just called something a hack, flow and on a regular basis comes from a lot of little preconditions being taken care of, and distraction being eliminated, and focus being increased, and curiosity, or even better, passion about what you're doing. So it's a process of learning and implementing. Let's see. From Dave. I felt flow during high intensity activities, but not so much during work. I'm the same way, and I'm learning about that, but maybe Rian can shed some light on that for us.
Sure,
yeah,
yes.
I can expand on that a little bit. I guess I play hockey, and I've played it at a high level, and so I'll, score a goal, and leading up to the goal, it'll be kind of a flow state where it's like, well, that was time slowed down, and I can feel that, macro flow, I guess, like you compared it to. But then when I'm sitting at my desk doing different things, and I guess also how it relates to entrepreneurship, like some of the others on this call, it's kind of, my background's in product design. So when I worked full-time as a product designer, I kind of was in that sweet spot, and I could have a day go by, hours at a time just fly by. But as an entrepreneur, you're always, a lot of times I'm, switching tasks, and it is very, it's a totally different from, bookkeeping to marketing, to where it's like my skill level is vastly different, and it is hard to find that sweet spot between challenge and skill balance. So it's, I guess for entrepreneurs, I feel like it's hard because I'll go through the day and try and do a million things and not really feel like I lost track of time, but really time kind of escapes me. So I guess that's more of my personal challenge with trying to get into the flow as far as switching gears during the day.
What about the, could you say a little more about time escaping you, that piece? What that feels like, or what happens there?
As far as, I guess,
what is it when you say like time escapes me? What's happening there? Is it that, you're just running out of time at the end of the day with stuff still to do?
part of it is getting distracted, because I think probably narrowing it down to the challenge skill balance, it gets frustrating. So I'll just hop to another task that I know I can do easier or that's more in my comfort zone. I feel like I want to be in that comfort flow state of doing tasks, but I guess maybe the question would be, how do I get myself into a good challenge, skill level balance if it's something I'm just learning brand new?
Yeah, it's a good question. And so basically flow takes place as one stage of a 4-part cycle. The cycle starts with a struggle phase, and then you go into a phase called release, which is the transition between the struggle phase and the flow state. Then there's the flow state itself as the third piece of the cycle. And then there's a recovery phase on the back end. And so what you mentioned there about switching from a challenging, dense, presumably pretty cognitively demanding task to a more kind of comfortable one, we do that usually just before we've gotten into flow within that more difficult task. So what happens is, generally there's what's called a loading phase that happens at the beginning of any task, and it's more difficult. We haven't yet gotten into flow, and the brain is assimilating information about that task. We're not yet in any sort of proper state of focus with respect to it, and it's hard and uncomfortable, and you're checking your watch or whatever, and the thought of doing this task that you're doing, which is really difficult, the thought of doing that for 2 hours or 3 hours or the whole day seems impossible. And because it's so difficult and uncomfortable, rather than persisting through that struggle phase, and as a result of that getting into flow, because of the fact that if you persist through the struggle phase, it goes from struggle to release to flow, we often distract ourselves, or as you said, switch to an easier task. So what happens so often is that people engage in something, and then they get 20, 30 minutes, 15 minutes into the struggle phase. They're not aware that if they just persist for another 10 or 15 or 20 minutes, they'll break through that struggle phase and into a flow state. And so they stop the task, or they do something else, or they check their phone, or they watch a YouTube video, or they, kind of alleviate the pressure and discomfort of that challenging task. So what I would say is to be aware that flow always sits just on the other side of that struggle phase, or almost always. And so just as it's getting kind of like really uncomfortable and you really want to switch task or distract yourself or just, go cook food or do anything else, if you flip that and instead lean in a little bit harder to the task and resist the urge to self-distract, it's very likely that you will get into flow doing that thing, even if it's difficult and uncomfortable at the beginning. So that's what I would say, is basically just to bear in mind the flow cycle and the different stages of it.
Okay, that makes sense, because right now I write a daily to-do list and I kind of hop all around. So maybe I should be more deliberate with my to-do list and say, okay, I'm going to do this in order and not hop to the next one until I, power through this, even though my brain and it's just easier to hop through. I think that it's easier to just hop through, but it doesn't sound, it makes sense what you said. I have to power through that struggle.
Yeah. So, it's a nuanced one. So, but yeah, you definitely want to power through that struggle phase, but you do also, you want to take the interest or the curiosity or the passion that you're feeling with respect to a certain thing on your to-do list seriously. And the more that you can do things based on curiosity or passion, even at the task level, the easier it's going to be to get into flow also. So it's about balancing and getting good at knowing when do I need to persist through the struggle phase and power through and resist the urge to kind of just be ADD and jump on something else that's more pleasant, or and then when is it great to switch task because I'm feeling really drawn to something else, because again, you don't want to waste that curiosity and passion, because it's one of the most powerful drivers for flow. But you also don't want to just kind of be in that ADD monkey-like state of just jumping from thing to thing and going 5 minutes in and just getting the novelty hit. So it's a tricky balance basically between persistence and passion. That's what I would say.
Okay, yeah, that's a good way to look at it.
Yeah, be aware that there's a worldwide epidemic of chronic distraction going on with all our notifications, emails, phone calls, texts, whatever. You know, all that stuff is there. All those distractions are there for the taking. And sometimes it just takes a little bit of focus to stay on point, stay on project. And you know, now you guys know there is that struggle phase to begin with when you're kind of getting into the zone and amalgamating everything that you're working on and focusing. Flow could be right on the other side of that for you.
Yeah.
Let's see what else we got in the chat. All right. Maddie, who's a mom, has challenges with her child needing her often and can't do something continuously, or I assume focus as much as she wants to.
What was that, Brian? Sorry, I didn't catch that one.
Maddie's got a young child and who needs her often, and she can't do things continuously. It sounds like she has trouble being able to focus and dive deep into something because of a lot of distraction from her child.
Yeah, it's one of the most challenging ones, and we when we look at the demographic data on our clients, I think it's over 75% of them have children and family, and it's tough. I mean, it's very difficult to balance things around your children. I mean, the first big level to look at, which is not even specific to flow, is just whether or not you can set things up at a lifestyle level or a professional level to be able to get more support so that you can have more space and time for yourself and for solitude and for deep work and for focus. Because, you know, getting into flow as an individual, it does require space, it requires time, and it requires a lack of distraction. You know, and that's just the reality of it. So the first thing I would do is try and look at whether there's any way at all to try and get even, you know, an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours a day, whether it's through a friend helping or someone in the family, or even getting really, really good at timing your work around their nap time potentially. But the first thing I would look at is just that lifestyle piece of how can I get, you know, even just to start with, how can I get 1 hour uninterrupted, and then ideally 2, 3, 4, 5. That's the first thing. And I know it's challenging. You know, it's not necessarily the easiest thing in the world. Then the second thing I would say is to try and get really, really good at setting clear goals. So clear goals are one of the triggers for flow as well. And this is a trigger for flow that helps particularly with focus at the onset of a task and with mitigating overwhelm. So one of the things that happens with you know, distractions from kids or family or other people is that we're getting kind of yanked in all sorts of different directions, and it's really hard to kind of know what the main thing to do in the moment even is. And it's even more difficult to actually start that thing. And it feels very overwhelming because you don't really know kind of what you're trying to do, yet you know you're not doing it, and you're getting yanked in different directions. And so setting clear goals is very, very simply the process of taking a broad task. So that might be, I don't know, creating an investment deck, let's say, as an example. And rather than attempting to just start that task with your kids around, have the first task be to set clear goals for that bigger task. And that means breaking out that broader task of create that investment deck down into really, really micro specifics. Like, for example, you know, open up Google Slides and select a theme, type out the headline for each page, populate the body text, whatever it is. But what that will do is it will allow you to more frictionlessly enter into the beginning of the task. Which is especially helpful if you've got other distractions like children there, because it can be very difficult to do the divergent thinking required to create clear goals in real time if you're being distracted by children. So instead, make that the first task, mapping out the really specific, clear goals, the subcomponents of the task. And then all of a sudden you've got, instead of that bigger, broader objective, you've got these almost, comically trivial little tiny things, potentially 10 or 20 or even 30 of them, bulleted out. And all you have to do is each of these little tiny, extremely specific actions, which is much less overwhelming and is much easier to do with distraction than these bigger, more complex objectives. So that's what I would say is make the first task, setting clear goals for the task, then go clear goal by clear goal through the task, even with the presence of distraction there. Then the final thing I would mention that may be useful is just getting good at being opportunistic and setting your work up so that you always know what your biggest priorities are, and so that it's easy to work on your biggest priorities at any given time. And a lot of people don't do this. A lot of people can't name off the top of their head the 3 most important things that they need to do for that month or for that quarter. Never mind having those things easy to work on. So I'll give you an example. This is a personal example here, but I just have a list at all times of the most important things that I've got to get done at a broader level, that month or that quarter. So I've got the number 1 is 5 hires we have to make. So there's, basically hire these 5 people is number 1. Number 2 is build and launch 2 back-end products. And then number 3 is to train our sales team in one of our products. And I've kind of mapped those out. I know that they're the big unlocking moves in advance. And then I just have that written out in front of my eyes all the time. And then more than that, I have the ability to invest time in achieving those things set up so that it's frictionless. And so the way I've done that is that I've got all of our hiring pipelines just active and open on my computer, so that when the opportunity emerges to be able to do something productive, it's there. I don't have to go digging into things or trying to figure out what it is that I'm trying to work on. It's just there. I've got the project for the product development mapped out and ready, so that at any time I can just jump in and work on that. And so that's the second thing I would say, or the third thing I would say is getting really clear on the big priorities, the big unlocking moves that are, taking place at a month to quarter level, having them very clearly top of mind at all times, and having your work set up so that it's very easy to work on any of those things. And that literally means, keeping the tabs open, or, designing the work in such a way that you know how to move each of those things forward easily at any point, so that when you get 30 minutes free from the distraction potentially of a child or of your family, you're able to jump on it and use that opportunistically well. So yeah, they're 3 things that, hopefully are useful, Maddie.
That helps me much more than you actually know, because I feel like I haven't set aside clear goals in order to do the things that I need to do. And I do get distracted often. And then when I go pick back up, I don't know exactly where I'm at. And if I have clear goals and I move down the line, then I could just keep moving on.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. It makes such a big difference. And what I do is I just write them out in, I just write out my clear goals for any task in my notes app on my computer. And so if I start noticing that I'm kind of dispersing focus or getting an urge to distract myself because I'm starting to lose clarity in what I'm doing, I just look back at the notes app and I'm like, okay, I just got to do this next extremely specific step. And the steps and the clear goals should be so small that it's easy to do that next step. It should be so small that it feels like just responding to an email. That level, that size of a task, and that way you can just kind of bring your attention back to the next clear goal. And it's so easy and small that you won't have the resistance to it that results in the procrastination or the self-distracting tendencies or behaviors.
Okay. Thank you.
No worries.
Thanks, Maddie. Within the Zero to Dangerous program that I'm just finishing up right now at the Flow Research Collective, they go through all these things, Rian does, step by step, and it's been extremely helpful in my goal setting, anywhere from the clear daily goals to up to what they call a massively transformative purpose, which is your sort of uber lifetime goal that shouldn't actually should be infinite. Let's put it that way. So I found so many things in there to help my businesses get traction, and not only that, but free up more time for relationships and rest and relaxation. So a lot of good stuff in there. Maddie, I think you probably saw what Jeff wrote you, which makes sense. He became a morning person when his kids were born to get a little extra time. So that's a good suggestion too. Dave has a question. Is there flow research being done using virtual reality?
Yeah, I can kind of expand on that question or give some context. I've done a decent amount of flow research, and I think the best way I've heard it described was how you were saying the challenge skill balance, and Tetris is a good example. And I just recently got a VR headset and I've been playing some games, and I feel like, especially with the headset, you're like literally in a different world and very focused on something. And I've been playing some games like Beat Saber, where similar to Tetris, you get a skill balance that you're really challenged and get better at. And then I heard a podcast saying that if you can do something in flow by playing a game or a sport or an activity, that'll help your productivity a lot during the workday. You know, if you're in the flow on Monday, the benefits will last a couple days. So I've been trying to get in the habit of maybe doing a little bit of that in the morning to kind of get my body flowing, and trying to literally get in the flow, even if it's separate from work, and try and see some benefits, even, with that'll transfer over. So I just that's been what I've been trying myself lately, and just kind of seeing if there's research behind that.
Yeah, well, firstly, there's good research on flow and video games, and Tetris is specifically one of the games that's been used, interestingly, in the research. And then secondly, I think VR is one of the most interesting applications for flow by far, in that, because you can design a fully immersive environment that has all of the flow triggers built into it intentionally. And people have done that just, by default very, very well within the video game industry. And so one of the big flow triggers is immediate feedback. Another one that we talked about is clear goals, the challenge skills balance. And all of those triggers are baked into video games. And we actually used to interact with an ex-Activision executive who built they built their games fully around immediate feedback and the challenge skills balance. And they would optimize the games fully around those two flow triggers, because they knew that if they used those two flow triggers, people would get into flow playing the game. And if people got into flow playing the game, they would play it a lot, basically. And so, yeah, I think VR is an amazing application. There's a group called TRIP, TRIP.
Yeah, I tried that. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So actually, we were looking at partnering with them and creating a flow priming experience where you would do a 20-minute like VR experience and activate a flow state, and you would do that just before beginning a different task you want to get in flow with it. And so there's interesting kind of possible applications there around priming for flow. And I haven't seen research directly studying flow with VR, but I know that in the field in general, there's a lot of people talking about the use of VR to drive and trigger flow, for sure. And I think it's one of the most interesting applications.
Yeah, it seems like it's just in its infancy. I mean, that Trip app seems really cool, but it seems like it's in its infancy. So it would be nice to have that option to just put on that headset, get a quick, prime to flow. Because like I say, I feel like I'm almost just trying to do it myself, or trying to get into some kind of flow to get into another flow. And I don't know if that makes sense or not.
That's the other thing that's worth mentioning as well, is that we often say the more flow you get, the more flow you get. And so there's a great book called Altered Traits by Daniel Goleman, who actually we just had on our podcast last week. And he talks about the fact that states become traits. So in other words, meditating or bringing yourself into a meditative state just for 20 minutes a day over time will result in a meditative trait. You will become a more meditative, mindful person by spending time in a meditative state. So states become traits. In other words, I think that's evident. And the same, it seems, the case with flow. So the more time you spend in flow, the easier it is to get into flow, and that's kind of activity independent. It seems to be that it transfers, that getting into flow lots in skiing will help you get into flow lots in riding, not just more flow while skiing, for example, because of that state to trait sort of transference or mechanism. And so yeah, I would definitely recommend using VR to get into flow if it gets you into flow, because of the fact that it will help you get into flow during other activities as well, I think.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Thanks, Dave. I think athletic pursuits and musical pursuits and more intensive activities are easier ways to get into flow. But when you start connecting the dots back to your business or your job, and also back to your relationships, it is such a game changer. And I'm just doubling down now, taking more courses with these guys because it's freaking brilliant. I mean, and I feel like it's the foundation for everything else. Let's put it that way. So I think we've been going about 45 minutes, and I think we got all the questions. Anything last minute from the audience for Rian or myself?
Nope, just wanted to say thank you.
You're very welcome. And thank you,
guys.
Rian, for joining us today. That was greatly unexpected and appreciated surprise.
And my pleasure. Brian, I don't know if you've got a few minutes after, by the way. Do you stay on?
Sure. Yeah, so
yeah, I appreciate it. This was great.
Let me also just throw a link in the chat for the Zero to Dangerous program I've been talking about, and you can check out some sort of an overview of it. Okay, and that's the Flow Research Collective's website. There's a bunch of free stuff too that'll help you. The passion recipe on their webinar that will help you find what you're most passionate about and organize your goals. I forget what else is on there, but there's a bunch of stuff under master classes you should check out. And that's about it. I appreciate you all showing up live today. And so I'm not in the 1% group anymore. I don't think I can post the recording, but if you see anybody talking about it in there, please let them know. I can hook them up with a recording of today. Okay.
All right. Thanks. That was very helpful.
All right. Cheers, guys. Thanks
Brian,
a lot.
if you want that link posted, you can send it to me. I can stick it in a thread if you like. It's up to you.
Perfect. Thanks a lot.
All right.
See you guys.
Thanks all.
Bye. Thanks for that.